academic writing? And have you considered what the main differences between academic writing and other types of writing might be? Let's start with those two questions before we invite some responses to what in particular you might find challenging and what strategies you may have developed already. Sharing some of these responses is useful, I think, to warm us up and get us into the main content of the presentation. So what are your thoughts about academic writing and or experiences, and what do you think so far in your learning are the main differences between academic writing? You can type in the chat box or you can raise a hand and jump on the mic. So I'll come to the chat in a moment, but Danny has raised their hands. Hi, Danny.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Danny.
Great, great. Yeah, I'm a mature age student. Went to school about 30 years ago and failed English. This is my first session at uni, so academic writing is very brand new to me. So I'm guessing I'm in similar shoes, hopefully, of other people in the room. But I would put it down to the purpose. So having an aim and an audience for who you're writing to. And probably the one thing I need to know most about is referencing.
Okay, well, welcome and hi, Danny. And yes, I'm sure there's many first years, and we do have many mature age students, and we have students of all kinds returning to uni after breaks and gaps or upgrading qualifications. So you are not alone. That's the first thing. The second point you make about writing for purpose, or the purpose of the writing and the audience for the writing, absolutely, this is a very important part of what distinguishes academic writing. And we will look at for whom we write when we're writing in an academic way as we get into the workshop. So thank you. Mary in the chat has said there are strict rules about set out, etc. And so set out, I assume, is layout and formatting. And that's right, Mary, different types of academic writing have different types of structuring and formatting. There's a difference, for example, between essays and reports, and we'll also consider that. Any other thoughts? What are some of the major differences people have perceived? Stephanie, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Stephanie, yep.
Hi, I'm in a similar boat, first time at uni, haven't really done any study since high school, also a mature age student. I think the thing that's going to be most challenging for me is referencing as well, but also learning to paraphrase correctly and making sure things are in my own words and not accidentally plagiarizing.
Great, yes, these are challenges. So the first point, which was also offered by Danny, yes, in academic writing, we need to reference the claims that we make, and we do that in text, and we provide a reference list at the end. And there is a broad skill set that you need to learn to apply to your academic writing. So that is one skill set that you do need to apply. This particular workshop won't focus necessarily in detail on referencing, but I can point you to resources that will begin to support you. We do have other workshops which will focus more on referencing, and yes, you do need in academic work to develop the skill of paraphrasing, because for everyone who may not be familiar with that word, to paraphrase is to put into your own words, that is, read someone else's work, be it an article or a report, etc., and translate the key points that you wish to communicate into your own words and provide a reference. So that is certainly something that distinguishes academic writing. Athea in the chat has said that it is more formal. Well done. Yes, it is more formal. You can imagine that academic writing is far more formal than a shopping list or an email that you might write to a friend, and we will consider what constitutes this formality a little bit in our introduction. Academic writing usually addresses a question, says Annie. Yes, good. And academic writing is more factual and structured and less creative. says Jacqueline. And yes, so creativity, we have various genres of creative writing, like prose or poetry or writing for drama or scripts, etc. And obviously that is a very, very different form of writing than writing in an academic context. Annabelle has raised her hand. Yes, Annabelle.
I was just wanting to know, in this academic writing, where can we use it, like in terms of in the real world of operation, just let's say in a hotel or things like that. Like, what is the purpose if it's not in academy? Like, if I read article or things like that, where can I apply it the most, connecting with this?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So academic writing, of course, mostly happens in the academy, that is in universities and in scholarly institutions. However, the writing is for a great variety of possible readers. Academics working in scientific areas, they publish articles, and those articles are read in all kinds of organisations, be they government organisations, be they public sector organisations, not-for-profits who might be interested in climate change, etc. So the writing lands in many places beyond universities. But also the style and the form and the formatting of the writing is used in all kinds of professional work, employment contexts. Government reports are published in academic formats and are freely available online. As I said, small organisations, non-government organisations write and provide reports. So people employed in those organisations providing reports to their internal staff, providing reports to their stakeholders of all kinds. So across the business sector and employment sector, academic and formal writing of different formats is absolutely used and useful. So I would hope you could see that broad scope for the use and applicability for learning how to write formally at university, but to carry it forward into a multitude of professions. And the formality, of course, we will learn in our workshop in a moment, has a lot to do with mechanisms that protect and preserve the credibility and the authority of your writing. Credibility and reliability in an academic context are provided no less through referencing, and you will see that government reports, and different kinds of documents in all kinds of workplaces rely on referencing their sources to other forms of knowledge. Some people have said, yes, writing is backed up with evidence. Fantastic, because all of your answers already prefigure what we will be looking at as we proceed with the presentation, and that the writing should be concise and succinct. So great answers and a great warm-up, because to think before we get into the materials will help you process what I present today. So let's move on. What we will be discussing, as I've said, you've already signaled some of these things, so it's wonderful, is we will consider the purpose and the reader when writing in academic context, or let's say in broadly formal contexts. We'll consider what academic knowledge is. We will using evidence to support knowledge, and we won't go into depth in terms of referencing, but we will signal its importance and what it is. There are other resources and other workshops you can check in with for referencing. We will look briefly at academic writing conventions and expectations to help you start to tune your writing and some of the skills you need, some of the choices you need to make to those academic conventions. And we will look a little at style. So that's where we're heading. Now, the first thing that was brought up by Danny, if I remember correctly, was purpose and reader. Now, naturally, in all contexts, we write differently depending on the context and the purpose for which we write, and therefore we consider the audience or the reader. You know, you only need to think about the difference between a thank you note to a friend, an email to boss, and the difference between the two. One can assume that the work email to your boss will apply to certain conventions. You will need to be polite and respectful. You will need to follow certain formalities and conventions that are expected in your workplace, and they will differ greatly than if you're just scrawling a note to a friend or a brief text that uses a bit of textese and abbreviation and emojis. So we can see that the purpose of our writing and how our writing is to be received and by whom shapes the nature of the writing that we do. Now, the overall purpose of academic writing is to share and discuss academic knowledge. Now, if we take away academic there, we can extend this principle into professional contexts. We can extend it into government, non-government, and a broad array of contexts that this applies to. Sharing and discussing of existing knowledge, and that knowledge being situated, in our case, in the university and produced by university researchers and scholars, etc., is our context. And in this case, the readers include academics and scholars and other students from all levels, from first year through to postgraduate students. So within our context, the purpose of academic writing is to share and discuss a body of academic knowledge, and our readers are broadly considered to be academics and scholars. So the first step is understanding what we mean when we talk about academic knowledge. And academic knowledge is some of the things and produced in some of the ways that we've already mentioned. But let's have a quick look. There are other systems of knowledge, of course. There's common sense, folklore, faith-based knowledge, mythology, superstition. There's what is called heuristic knowledge, learning by doing. So knowledge held as practical skill. There's all kinds of knowledge, and often these other forms of knowledges may be general knowledge or information. They may help make sense of our everyday lives. They may be practical in that sense and useful. They may be embodied knowledge, held in the body. And so there's a range of those. And these kinds of knowledges in their everyday context don't always require a level of proof or detailed explanation or support. And frequently they are considered to belong to everybody. But in our context, academic knowledge is knowledge that other scholars, experts, and scientists gather or create, that is, produce. They might produce knowledge by certain processes of experiment in labs, studies, tests, etc. We also produce knowledge when we survey other knowledge and come up with our own thesis or position. And so it's knowledge that already exists or is created by scholars, etc., to understand the world, explain how things work, and suggest how they might be improved. We often offer recommendations in academic contexts, or for that matter in professional contexts. So in our context, evidence is required when a claim is made, and the knowledge belongs to the researchers. If I have undertaken a 5-year research topic and I produce a report based on that research with specific findings, the knowledge that I've produced and documented and had published is considered to belong to me. And so the information therein is specific and detailed. So you can see some broad and general differences. And when we are talking about evidence, we are talking about referencing, and we'll get to that. So broadly, academic knowledge is a process. And you can see here from the diagram that it starts with theory, an idea, that is explored through research, returned to theory and tested again in research. And this circular process occurs in a repetitive way, and it is informed by disciplinary practices. And what I mean by saying disciplines, I mean different fields of knowledge have different processes and different language to talk about what they produce. Studying in education, in the field of education, is very different than studying in perhaps the field of the biological sciences. The processes are different, but nevertheless, theories are engaged, research is undertaken in different ways, and this process results in, and produces an informed practice. Now, from this process, academic writing is produced. We have reports, we have essays, annotated bibliographies, a range of different kinds of writing outcomes. And it emerges from the process, but it also contributes to the process. We may read the theories of others before undertaking our own further research. So academic knowledge builds on existing knowledge and information, and because we are getting that knowledge and information from others, we need very much to rely on the evidence of others and not mere opinion. And so often it's asked, well, where does my knowledge, my existing knowledge come in, or my opinion? And this is a kind of tricky question, but have a look at this next slide. Academic writing is not a patchwork of people's ideas, of various people's ideas. You are very central to the process of your academic writing and what claims you make and what arguments you make. And in a way, those claims, those arguments, and the cumulative overall position you take is, in a way, congruent with your opinion or the position you have on a particular topic. But you'll learn that we don't write in my opinion because we try to avoid being subjective in academic contexts, except for a couple of exclusions, which we'll consider. So your job is to demonstrate your knowledge or opinion, but you must do it through constructing an argument. You do it through examining the ideas of others, and you do it through presenting evidence to support your argument. So when you look at other materials and sources, you rely on them as evidence and you incorporate that evidence through referencing in your writing to support your own argument. So you must support your claims appropriately. And appropriate evidence is what substantiates your argument or gives it credibility. So to do this, you really do need to learn how to use evidence in your writing, and critically, you need to learn how to reference. And as I've said, this presentation won't focus in detail on referencing. However, I want to point you to our other Learning Zone workshops and to our quick guides. You need only Google SCU quick guides and you will be taken straight to our resource page that has a great deal of information to support inclusion of evidence in your writing and also to get you started with your referencing. We also have a number of how-to videos which support individual examples of referencing in APA and in Harvard styles. So check into the Learning Zone and have a look at the resources that are already there, but there will be further new workshops that will be available. Danny has asked, what if you are arguing the same point as someone else? Well, this will be quite common, Danny. It's quite feasible that, for example, I've got 40 attendees in our workshop today. It's quite possible that on any one topic, any number of you, let's say 25 of you, could easily take the same or similar position on a specific question or on a specific topic. However, how you argue that position and how you support that position will vary. Some of you will have an overlapping number of sources, the same things you have read. Others will have found different research. Others will take different line of attack, if you like, or a different perspective, and yet come to or arrive at a similar conclusion or position. So many academics, scholars, scientists argue similar positions. And for example, one form of academic writing called a literature review, the job you would have if doing a literature review is actually synthesizing all of those positions. And you would end up saying things like, a number of academics agree that X is the case. However, a dissenting view is from Y, and you would support your observation by referencing the group of academics or scholars who agree on a position and identifying the scholar, academic or scientist who disagrees. So agreement is common, but that doesn't mean that all writing is the same or has the same credibility. But it's a great question. Now, in this process, it's important to be tentative when making your claims. Now, the reason for this is that we can't possibly read all of the evidence on a topic, even in a lifetime. Likewise, findings and research develop over time and change. What was known in the first few weeks of the coronavirus outbreak about the virus was very little. And already in a relatively short period of time, there are already a number of publications in scientific journals reporting on findings of studies and experiential learning from cases. And so knowledge develops and changes. So we need to be tentative and cautious, because even in the scientific world, it's rare that there are conclusive results. It's rare that things don't need further testing, or it's rare that they may not change. And so we need to be cautious with our language in academic writing around the idea of proof, for example. So the examples offered here are types of phrases you might use that give you an example of what being cautious looks like. You might write, the evidence suggests that diet was an important factor in the health of the respondents, rather than saying the evidence proves that, or it is absolutely demonstrated. So we need to be cautious, and cautious language might use words like suggests or the following. This appears to indicate a tendency. And there would be a number of other ways of expressing this tendency. Can anyone think of cautious language, lead-ins for sentences like that you might use if you're referring to things that you've read? Potentially, yes, good. Somewhat, yes, this is what we would call a cautious, a refining word. Evidently, excellent, yes. That is according to the evidence, not according to your opinion, or not absolutely. Something portrays that, yes. When we talk about portrays, it's a kind of visual image. So certainly we can use that phrase if we're talking about visual phenomena. We're not likely, Alan, to use "in my opinion," because we don't want to allow our writing to be only our subjective opinion. We want to construct our writing in a way that relies on evidence. Yes, Smith argues that. One possible explanation is, good, Kate, it appears that. Okay, great. So you have a sense of using cautious language to nevertheless make a claim, and then you would use a reference in text to say where you got that information. Okay. So academic writing conventions and expectations that are in place that you need to be aware of. Usually when you present your writing in an essay or a report, or a literature review, or any other form of academic writing that you'll come across, a research proposal, an annotated bibliography, we expect that your work will be offered in a logical sequence. So you need to present information in an order that flows logically and connects ideas one to the other and makes sense for the reader. And there are a number of conventions that guide this. For example, in an essay, one part of your introduction in an essay is a summary of the key ideas that will be made in the body of the essay. And then when you are writing the body of your essay, your paragraphs should follow that summary of key points that you make in the introduction. And in this way, we communicate to the reader the logical flow of the points that they can assume they will encounter. So introductions are important for organizing your writing, and likewise conclusions are very important because they summarize and recap, and they restate the main position or the main argument. Also, paragraphs in essays, many of you will encounter essays in your academic life. Paragraphs in essays are ordered logically according to the flow of information that you suggest in the intro. But also we have something called topic sentences, which are the first sentence of paragraphs, and they tell the reader the main point of that paragraph. And so there are certain cues and techniques we use to logically sequence our work. As some of you have suggested, academic writing is structured in certain kinds of ways. Reports, for example, include headings and subheadings and frequently contents pages, whereas essays conventionally do not have headings and do not have subheadings. We rely rather on topic sentences to guide the reader, whereas in a report, much more formally structured in a signaling way to communicate sections of the report that are most relevant to the reader. Annotated bibliographies are another form of writing which take notes on particular sources and evaluate them and present findings. So there are different formats, but nevertheless we need to pay attention to how you structure your work. And the Learning Zone has numerous quick guides to give you models for that structure. Kamala, yes, you have a question.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Kamala, yes.
I think maybe you just answered it then. I was just going to ask in regards to the structure for essays, because I still just have the idea from high school of we had a specific structure of topic, sentence, evidence, elaboration, and then the kind of conclusion for your paragraph. And so
great, and that sounds very similar to the kinds of guides we provide you with in our quick guides in the Learning Zone. You seem to be describing something that I'm familiar with there called the Peel method, where yes, we make a point, which is the topic sentence. We explain, elaborate, give evidence, which is the E of P-E-E-L for peel, like peeling an orange. So we explain or elaborate, we give evidence and examples. So these E's can mean those things. And then the last L refers to a linking sentence, which is a concluding sentence. So yes, you're already on to the case, Kamala, and your question has helped share a little bit more of what structuring we use with paragraph. For example, in our quick guides, you can find a quick guide on paragraphing. And in our quick guides, you can also find quick guides on overall structures of essays according to introductions, conclusions, body paragraphs, etc. Can I just inquire if everyone can still hear me reasonably? I can see that the internet might be struggling a little bit. Yes, I've got lots of yeses. Great, thank you. So even though my internet seems to signal a bit of a red zone, you can still hear me. Great. Okay, so we've also observed that academic writing is evidence-based. Yeah, and that means at a basic level that we need to refer to the sources of information from which we drew our main claims or our main supporting points for our arguments. And to do that, we have conventions around referencing in our text, and that usually means putting the surname of the author or authors that we read, the date of the source that we read from them, and placing that information in brackets, often at the end of our sentence before the full stop, and sometimes at the beginning of our sentences as part of a lead-in. We might say Smith and then put in brackets 2019, argues that, and then we make the point in our own words that we read in Smith. And you can see some of those conventions detailed in our how-to videos, as well as, of course, your SCU LibGuides for APA referencing or for Harvard referencing. And a simple way to find those guides is simply to Google SCU APA or SCU Harvard, and they'll be the first link that comes up. So we provide evidence for our claims. We try to be as precise as possible in our writing. So rather than saying all people visit the museum frequently, we can say 85% of people who visited the museum do so frequently. So we try to be as precise as possible, and we try to be as succinct as we can be and avoid generalized waffle, due to the fact that on certain occasions a number of people have been known to otherwise try to cut to the chase. Yeah, state the fact rather than pad out the facts with a lot of words. We try to be accurate, and it's very important, therefore, that when you read, you take accurate notes and that you translate the key points into your own words, which is called paraphrasing, in order to report accurately, but in your own written expression. And there are a number of conventions that relate to what we call the formality of academic writing. Now, here are some slides that give you a little bit more graphic representation of some of the conventions or expectations of writing that we have in academic contexts. One of the most important ones is we attempt to avoid first person in our writing. That is the use of I, we, me, us, our. In other words, in grammatical terms, we avoid personal pronouns. So we don't write I believe that, or in my opinion, or I think it's a matter of time until. We try to avoid the use. In this presentation, I have been frequently saying we do this, we do that in academic writing. It's appropriate perhaps in a presentation, but it's not appropriate in your writing. I, me, we, us. So instead of saying, we can consider that a number of issues impacting climate change are, we don't say the we. We simply say, a number of issues impacting climate change are, and then we might state them clearly. And there's some examples here. You don't necessarily have to fully understand the difference between passive and active voice grammatically, but you can see in the examples that we can get rid of the I by using what is called the passive voice. The passive voice often puts things in the past tense or uses the past participle of the word. So, I believe that X is true. It can be demonstrated that X is true. Or it is evident that X is true. And then, of course, you would reference the authority from which they. Rather than writing I conducted a study to test, we get rid of the I by making the study itself the first thing in the sentence. Rather than I conducted the study, a study was conducted to test. Yeah? Or researchers conducted a study to test. So we try to remove the person from the front position of our language and try to move to the thing itself, to the study or to the information. So we focus on the what, not the who. So rather than I will look at another perspective, we focus on the thing itself an alternative perspective on this issue is, and we cut to the chase in that way. We use words and actions that refer to the evidence, and this is part of including or integrating evidence into your writing. The literature suggests that. Many theorists agree that, according to the results. So we tend to use phrases that point to the credible and reliable sources that we have read, that we are basing our information on, because this gives us credibility and this gives us authority to make the claims. Now, there is an exception to using I, we, me, etc. and us. And there is a form of writing that we call reflective writing. And reflective writing means that you will be asked to reflect on your own experience. If you are a nurse and you have gone on a placement and you are asked to reflect on the experience of your placement, you will have to use I. However, even in the form of writing, you will be asked to support some of your insights from your experience from the existing literature or knowledge. And then you will have to move into the third person, where you are using this more formal and objective, or an attempted objective expression rather than subjective expression. So we attempt to write objectively rather than subjectively. And subjectivity is not just about using the word I. Instead of saying things like, oh, it's obvious, or current marketing strategy is terrible, well, that's a very subjective opinion. It may be obvious to you, or it may be terrible to you, but you need to write in such a way that suggests that others support the view, or you need to be critical and say why it may be obvious. You also need to be cautious, as we said. It appears, it's obvious that the company is about to collapse. It appears that the company may suffer an imminent collapse unless blah, blah, blah. And then you might cite a report that supports your view. And there's other examples of writing here. We try to not use personal expressions. People feel that. Rather, there are issues that a number of people are concerned with, or this raises the concern. We also, to be a bit more technical, we try to use more nouns than verbs or doing words and phrases. So rather than saying, staff in the nursing home have begun to worry about, you might say a phrase like, staff in the nursing home expressed a number of concerns about. So this is a difference between verb phrases and nouns, and academic writing in its formality tends to use more nouns. Don't assert claims as if they are only your personal opinion. Assert claims as if they are supported more broadly from the research. It has been argued that, even if it is your opinion, it has been broadly argued that, and you might use 3 authors to support you. Previous research has indicated. Clearly, research suggests that, or the evidence suggests. So you can see an application of the caution that we mentioned earlier. Academic writing attempts to avoid cliches and everyday speech, habitual language, cliches, slang, street terms. So rather than kind of typical phrases and everyday phrases, it was beyond a shadow of a doubt, or, oh, it's easier said than done, or it's a bit of a hit and miss performance. Well, these are fantastic phrases. They add colour and they add creativity and distinction to our everyday speech. But in an academic context, if it was beyond a shadow of a doubt, then it was certain. Let's be precise, succinct, and concise. It's more difficult in practice, easier said than done. Yeah, you can see that there is a formality in how we reorganize our phrases, and we do it through words that might be specific in your field of study, and we do it through organizing our language to be as precise and concise as possible. Try to avoid 2-word verbs. The proposal was turned down, scientists are looking into, We can simply say the proposal was rejected rather than turned down, and scientists are investigating. You can see there is a conciseness and an attempt to be succinct. Definitely avoid rhetorical questions. Don't ask your reader questions that they can't answer. You should make statements. So, you know, given these results, why do we still use them? Well, the reader can't answer. So avoid that rhetorical form. In other forms of public speaking, that might be a useful technique to create a dynamic sense of urgency or questioning or raise awareness in the audience. But in academic writing, we tend to avoid them. Definitely avoid run-on expressions like etc. and so on and so forth. If it's to be included, for example, etc., then name the 3 things more that etc. would refer to. And do not use contractions. Contractions are words where apostrophes signal gaps in some letters or words in the thing. So instead of don't, in academic writing, you will see do not. You know, instead of can't, you will see cannot, etc. Now, these are all some of the conventions that you need to consider. And as you've got copies of the PDFs for this presentation, you can go back and refer to them. It's not expected that you can take them all in one sitting, but you can refer back to them as you edit your writing. You might not, you might use contractions throughout your first draft of your essay or report. But if you return to these essential principles, you'll be able to tweak up your memory and say, okay, I'll now review and edit my work for contractions, or I'll now review and edit my work for first person expression, and I'll get rid of all the I's and I'll rephrase my sentences. So this introduction is to give you ideas about what to look out for, perhaps not in your absolute first attempt at a draft, but certainly as you begin to refine and edit your work. And the best way to get a feel for the tone, the sound, if you like, and the feel of academic writing is to read journals, theses, book chapters that are formal and academic. We've already mentioned we need to pay attention to how paragraphs are constructed, how sentences are constructed. Pay attention to how others incorporate evidence into their writing. How have they placed the reference? How have they phrased the lead-in sentence that incorporates the reference? Look at the language or the words or phrasing that is used to link ideas, for example.